be starting my speech in I will be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Now, we believe that cracking down on minor crimes is the belief that will prevent bigger ones. Now, firstly, let's start with some context and characterization. Now, in the 1970s, rebellious youth bear paint sprays and took to the streets and walls, vandalizing the latter, filling it with paint and messages of all sorts, ranging from basic love messages to those of racist, misogynistic, and sexual nature. This was known as the Terror Nights in New York and marked the beginning of the crime wave that shook New York by surprise. Now, let's start first by some word clarification. Now, what is graffiti really? Because that's what the debate will stand on. What the way we define graffiti is portraits or some sort of messages drawn in a certain way and manner by paint sprays by individuals over walls, mostly public spaces. And what we mean by now legalizing it is basically that it will be forbidden in public space. Now, let's proceed with the status quo. So, graffiti is mostly common among the youth, often rebellious and uneducated. It is illegal in most places. For example, places like Dallas, London, and Berlin, some of the most prosperous places on earth, have all banned and imposed restrictions of legal nature on graffiti. It is unfortunately some legal in some places, such as Paris, where the city council is pushing to impose law restrictions on the latter simply because there have been too much citizen complaints about graffiti and because it is too expensive to clean up and it has several negative effects, which we will be discussing in the following speeches and this speech. Now, who are the major stakeholders of this debate? Number one, we believe that the major stakeholder of this debate is the poor fraction of society. Graffiti often occurs in poor areas of a city or a region, which means that those that inhabit this region, mostly the poor people, are the ones mostly affected by it. The second stakeholders is the society as a whole. The majority of people in places where graffiti was common at a certain age and time opposed graffiti. We strive to protect the stakeholder of today's debate. Now, what do we really propose? We basically propose to impose restrictions and non-legalized graffiti in public places. Now, why do we believe that? Firstly, here is our main argument. Graffiti encourages crime. In several studies, it has been shown that graffiti is likely to make twice as much crime as it comes. Basically, when you grow up in an environment where your surrounding walls have been the victim of vandalization in the form of graffiti, the environment is promoting a sense of social and civil disobedience. This concept was called the broken window theory. It was the theory under which police agencies in the 1970s acted. For example, let's take a look at New York. At New York in the 1970s, where, by the way, graffitis were first introduced to the world, crime literally increased and doubled over a period of 1 year. It was the greatest crime rate ever recorded in the history of the city. As policemen and psychologists and sociologists tried to figure out a way to stop it, they came down to the concept of the broken window. They started with the little things such as graffiti, etc. And they realized that graffitis and the people who grew up around them were most likely to engage in violence behavior, in criminal behavior, and most probably engage in several shapes and sorts of social and civil disobedience, often manifested by the commitment of grave crimes. Now, how is the primary stakeholder affected by this? This has a direct impact on the poor fraction of society. The majority of graffiti is carried out in areas of little prosperity, often in the poorest region in the city. Now, what this initially means is that people exposed to graffiti when they're young, when they're still kids, are most likely to commit crimes. And so these people are poor themselves. Now, here is the interesting stuff. Why is this important? In a society, it is critical to have a social mobility system, a system that will allow people of low financial and social classes to climb this class ladder and social ladder in society. According to the broken window theory, exposure to gravity is strongly likely to lead people into social and civil disobedience most often expressed in the shape and form of crime and violent action. What this eventually means is that instead of going to school or developing the necessary technical and social skills required to climb that ladder, these kids, these poor kids, most importantly, lean towards the crime sector. They grew up in that environment, they lived in that environment, they were affected by that environment for their whole life, and now they have to deal with the consequences of that exposure because that exposure turn them into more violent people, more criminal in nature, and most importantly, it will keep them poor because instead of going to school, instead of going to places where they can evolve socially and intellectually, they spend their days manifesting their social disobedience, their disobedience of the government, the disobedience of the world in general, and this creates a very dangerous phenomenon, which is financial and social segregation. So basically, graffiti has a direct impact on these people because these people are the ones that are staying poor. Now, proceeding, we have why it is more important, useful than the alternative, and the alternatives are the ones proposed by the proposition team here. Basically, our stance is clear. We need to protect the major stakeholders. And in order to do that, we must restrict and even make graffiti non-legal so that we can protect these classes, we can protect these people from manifesting criminal activity,
UI.
etc. Go ahead.
So you're saying that Black people doing graffiti are poor just because they're doing graffiti, right?
That's absolutely wrong, and that just proves you understood nothing about my speech. That's even ridiculous. I have not even mentioned black people. That's the funny thing. What I said is that graffiti often occurs in places of low and very poor financial means, basically in regions where poverty reigns. And these people are often born poor. It doesn't matter whether they're black or white or Latinos, they are human beings after all. And the fact that they grow up in a poor environment where they are exposed in a massive way to graffiti will often result in a leaning and tendency towards criminal activity, towards civil disobedience, towards social disobedience. And this is not my theory. This is a theory that has been studied for decades and was proven right over and over again. And the proof that it is right is if you take a look at New York, how did they really solve the crime problem? Firstly, they banned all graffitis in public spaces. They painted over the subways. They painted over the vandalized walls, and they made sure that no one ever drew graffitis again. And after a few years, we have seen a change in the behavior of people from those specifically violent and more exposed regions. Now, this is what we meant. It is as simple as that. It has nothing to do with race. It has mostly to do with where you come from and how you were was if you were exposed to that to that graffiti. Now, in conclusion, I have 15 seconds left. Basically, graffitis have a direct impact on whether you lean towards crime or not. And as a result, it is important to protect the major stakeholders of this debate, which is the poorest fraction of society, and save them from such things, and most importantly, allow for them to evolve economically. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for that speech. Speech was 8 minutes and 26 seconds. We will now have the second speaker from the proposition side.
Okay, am I audible?
Yes.
Perfect. So I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Hello, ladies. Hello, gentlemen. I'm honored today to be the second speaker of the proposition team. Today, I will be doing 3 major things. Firstly, I will do some rebuttals. Then I will present to you my arguments. And lastly, I will do some really important weighting. So let us begin by some of the cases of the proposition team. So they really talks about and they really point out how having those graffitis is a disobedience. I really feel like they did not listen whatsoever of the model that we have put. What is graffiti? Graffiti is a form of art. Point. This is what it is about. Graffiti is art, as my first speaker has already mentioned out through her speech. Another point how they talked about New York is 1970s, how the first form of graffiti, well, I'm sorry to tell you, it began in Florida. So not really began in New York, but this kind of not really that important. Then they start talking about the civil disobedience. They talk about crimes, how graffiti is a crime, and how we should protect those crimes. And I'm really sorry, Sylvia, I'm asking you, do you think that art is a crime? Art is not a crime. I am here to tell you, art is not a crime. You can believe in whatever you need to believe. You can have so many beliefs, and you have all the right to express them whatever you want. And when it really, where I think we have ultimately won this debate is when the other speakers start talking about, not taken, how the other speaker started talking about how these graffitis happen in low or poor states, right? This is really important. When they talk about those poor people, those low people, in a way, I feel like it was what he said. And even when my POI, when my camera talks about the POI, how it's low or poor poverty reigns, well, I'm here to tell you, those poor people do not have the right to express themselves. Those poor people do not have the right, either their race, their religion, their beliefs, they do not have the right to express themselves. Those are poor people, people that cannot write, people that cannot go to the journal, people that cannot go to a speech. The only way that they know how to express themselves is by what? By the only way that they can is by those gravities. And the only way that they can express themselves, not taken, the only way they can express themselves, the only way where they can talk, where they can express themselves, express their beliefs, express how they're mad at society, you're blocking that from them, you're making them illegal. Who are you making those graffiti illegals? To the people who need it the most. And you said it. This is what you quote. Those are poor people who did not go to school, who cannot go to school. Another point that I'm really asking myself is how the relationship between, not taken, the relationship between going to school and graffiti, nothing to do. These are two different things that have nothing to do within today's debate. We are talking about graffiti and how it is an art and how it should be legalized, not rather how people educate their child and how the society should put and how the institutions should put their children within schools. Two different things. And also how they're going to, sorry, I will not take that. I will take that furthermore. Thank you. When they talk about the poor kids and the crime sector, how the consequences, how the war is going, etc. This is really nonsense in a way, because even in your best case scenario, let's say it's illegal, because it's illegal in so many places, right? It's illegal. Do people stop doing it? No. So either ways, because it's their only way of expressing themselves, they will need to find a way. What is the difference between a book where, when the POI was asked what they talk about fascism or like Nazism, even about communism, something that really is bad for the society. When they wrote it in a book, it's not a problem. When you're going to go to the street and express yourself, it's a problem, because it's the only way that you express yourself. It is a problem, not taken. And I think within all those points that I have rebutted, now let me give you my own insight on the discussed matter. So what I will do today is that firstly, I'll give you my first argument is how this graffiti is the freedom of expression. This is a principle. Art ceases to be art without freedom of expressions, and perhaps graffiti exercises this right more than any other medium. Taking creativity to these trees mean that the artists don't need to worry about gallery creators, critics, or potential and can therefore be completely unrestrained. And even anonymously, if they choose so. Status doesn't matter, and the lack of limitations allow graffiti artists to break conventions, to push boundaries, to create even more exciting and arguably more authentic work art. Because this is what we want. In our side of the house, what we are proning. Firstly, we are proning freedom of speech, freedom of expression. We're also proning art, because we want everyone to find a way to express themselves. If it means by drawing, painting, no, not taken. If it is by going to a painting or have enough money, because we're talking about poor people, as the other team has pointed out. Poor people, they cannot buy those painting, they cannot buy colors. The only way they don't think that they have in their hands, the only way that they can is those streets. And so it means that they need to do graffiti to express themselves and to find a way to express themselves. Another point I think really important to say is that also graffiti is a form of artistic self-expression, as I've already said earlier, to show a variety of feelings, but to look at the word in a different and imperfect way, because this is how the word really is, imperfect. This is what I'm talking about, freedom of expression and free of speech, because we are living in a world where everyone needs to be so perfect, even though we do not need to have something like that. The world is really imperfect. We can talk, for example, we get so many examples how it actually helps and how it's really criticized, and how it helped. For example, Banksy, who become world famous for his humorous and sympathetic commentary like Love is Air, first painting on Jerusalem's West Bank barrier in 2003 as a statement favor to Palestinian rights. This is how they, not taken, this is how they have proven how graffiti have made a way to make, to express themselves and within, and to protect and to express their beliefs within so many really important subjects, because they do not give the right, like as a Palestinian rights. If it means go in the West Bank and why do not do so? Why make it illegal? Another point is that with Kate was able to bring mass attention to the crack epidemic through this Crack is Whack mural, as well as homosexuality and AIDS, AIDS crisis. Plenty of our Fikonadi would argue that it's art's duty to shed light on such topics. And given that these themes relate to ordinary people, perhaps to poor people, perhaps it's unsurprising that the most iconic example were created on the streets the target audience live on. This is basis. And this is what I'm talking about freedom of speech. This is what it is about. This is what this principle is about. And this is why it is protected time. And this is why I believe we have ultimately won this debate. Let us imagine those two words within my 50 seconds left. Those two words, word, proposition side, and our side of the words, what we have when we legalize those. And also they have been legalized in so many countries out there. We can take, for example, Paris, France. We can take some places in Zurich, in Switzerland, some places in Poland. Do they make them dirty? No. It's a great way to express themselves. In Queens, in New York. Look how those places have actually held the public and how it's a way of expressing themselves. So when we compare those two words, a word where we are promoting freedom of expression, we're promoting a new form of art that existed thousands of years ago and now is criticized for no reason, even though it is one of it is a freedom of expression. This is basic rights. And on the other side of the house, where we're still going to have those graffiti, but now being illegal, because in so many countries, they are illegal. And does it make them not exist? No. And this is why I think we have ultimately won this debate. And I'm really proud to propose. And thank you for listening to my speech.
Okay, the speaker time was 8 minutes and 10 seconds. We will now have the second speaker.
Okay, I'll have a second. Okay. I hope you can see me.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Okay, so my speech will start in 3, 2, 1. As the second speaker of my team, I'll first defend our arguments and rebut the other team's ones, and I'll ultimately share my own. So the argument stated by the proposition team is wrong in view of the fact that forms of art that are less harmful to the majority are an option that we as a state can see as possible. So when it's an artist that wants to talk about, I don't know, he likes fascism, just like your teammate was pro painting fascism, so I'm taking that example. So when it's one fascist against millions that are against fascism, why would they want to see that portrait on the walls? So also he said that we don't say that like art is a crime. Art is a crime if it defends a cause that goes against human rights and that goes against the public opinion. So associating poor people to illiterate is not what my teammate has done, and that is something that you fail to see. So they can ask, for example, the poor people you talked about can ask for other means to express themselves, and I think that would cost less to the government than graffiti does, and that is one of the many solutions on our side. So we just do not want that art on the public space. It can be on a canvas, it can be on a canvas at home, but it cannot be on the public space because not everybody agrees on it in the first place, and also because It is a new kind of way to indoctrinate those poor kids that live in those neighborhoods into thinking that some ideas are normal, and to thinking and into shaping these young minds into thinking what those people want them to think. Young kids are going to go out and are going to see those opinions. How can you create your own opinion when everything you have seen in your life are paintings, the same opinions all over your neighborhood? It can be opinions praising drugs. It can be opinions. No, thank you. It can be opinions that go against the public opinion, and we just don't want to see those kids suffer from that. Why? Because first of all, they will have no right to the social ladder. They will be kept in that place, and they will always see drugs as the only solution, violence as the only solution. They would see, I don't know, policemen as the enemy, and the only good one is the only good solution is to follow what's written. So for them, everything that is written on the walls is true, because I have seen it since I was 3 years old, for example. So that sense, the state, we as proposition think that the state has a duty to protect those poor kids that you talked about. Last, Banksy could have done that on a canvas too, and I think it would have had the same impact on our population while preserving our city, and everything would have worked. So your campaign about AIDS also can be solved outside the public property. There are so many solutions and so many means that I don't think we need graffiti that ruins our cities anymore. Furthermore, Prop failed to see where the debate is, because it's not about you being for art and us being against art. It's just that we do not want art on the public space. Please tell me when time's up, because I don't have my chrono is not working. Okay, so after rebutting and defending, I'll now state my arguments that I fully believe are of great importance. My first one being that costs of gravity to the government are so high. Furthermore, I added a second argument that deals with the subject of the cost of the street art to citizens of the city and the dangerous side of graffiti. So the government pays people, pays equipment, pays some unimaginable means to paint our walls white or any color and create a safe environment free of gang signs and discriminatory graffiti, and overall a clean and neutral to satisfy the majority of the population. States don't choose to do this to annoy those poor artists, nor to suppress art, but they do it because it is disrespectful and violates freedom and public property. As a citizen who pays their taxes each year, I would like to go to the park where I don't find signs that I can see, signs that my kids can see, signs that are not undermining public morals and the value I stand for, the values we stand for as citizens of that population. Let's take, for example, Morocco or any Muslim country. How would they feel if an obscene portrait was drawn on the park there are kids playing in? And it's not only Muslim, it's every single rational human. Everybody would hate going to the mall or to the park and seeing vulgar paintings. Let's say that has the right to protect its citizens and ensure a safe environment for everybody, because we believe that safety is above all superior to anything else. So let's take a normal citizen that wakes up to a property, to a huge man, knowing he paid for his house and is by law his private property. So how would it be fair for him to receive this punishment and to have to pay for the painting before the graffiti and after that? Do you think he's going to be happy about it because it's art? That will and that paint on it has been paid by the work he had woken up for every day. What right does one has to violate his property and steal away all the hard work he dedicated to it? Panel, we all believe the same. Your freedom ends where mine begins. Just as you think it's a freedom of speech, I think it's a freedom and a right for me to have a property and not have it smeared with God knows what. Opposition side chooses to give one person the freedom of speech and steal everybody else's freedom and rights of having private property. And that is just right. That is just not right. Last, just like our first speaker stated, what limits would we put on graffiti? Imagine being a policeman and being forced to see a graffiti saying "A cab" outside your porch. Imagine being a rape victim and seeing graffitis of people who say that you deserve it, for example. What would be the limits of this law and how much would it cost for us citizens? Let's take a poor country like Ethiopia or Somalia. Do you think the state has enough funds to pay people to see if the graffiti is controversial or not? Do you think they would have the money to fund a whole group of people that would control if the graffiti is legal or not? No, this is not even their model. I am just here creating a case for proposition to even have something to interact with. Even in the best case scenario that I created for proposition sign, we would have a rich country that legalizes graffiti and devotes a whole unit of the police control. First, this would cost so much out of the state money that could be used in a better way. They could use it to solve the problem talked about in the graffitis. AIDS, they could use those. Sorry?
1 minute left.
Okay, they could use that money to solve the AIDS problem. What would be better, mobilizing a cop paid $40,000 a year to go check on graffitis and their legal status, or have the cop serve the community, solve crime, which is his intended job, invest the lost money in opening schools and hospitals and solving conflicts over the world. How in our era, we do not need graffiti to spread information or spread our opinion or support a cause. A simple tweet would be sufficient. And if we want to be artistic with it, you can paint it on the canvas and post it online. It also would reach more people. To sum it up, it would be a loss of money for the state and us citizens who provide our tax money to the said state. And it would overall just mobilize units that could do better in the world. The issue here is also the limit geographically. In proposition case, there could be someone who feels the need to draw on Taj Mahal, and well, based on prop saying they could, where would be the limit? Who would secure those places for them not to be painted? In our world, we have a priceless material heritage, and we cannot waste it on one person's opinion to matter. Panel prop gave us so little that according to prop, we would be able to paint a swastika in Auschwitz. Is time's up?
You have 15 seconds left.
Okay. It is also dangerous. There's also a dangerous side of graffiti that is undeniable. I would rather have safety over one person's expression of opinion. When you are the most scared, you think about safety more, not expression. I think that is a right to have racial punity punished by law. And because if I see a swastika outside the house, and for example, I'm Jewish, I don't know, I feel menaced, and it is a menace society, and it will create big movements that once again menace the stability of the society, divide the country, and would create big conflicts such as that would lead to violence and big things that we can't even.
Okay, time is up.
Thank you.
All right, the speaker spoke for 9 minutes and 5 seconds. Let's please welcome the next speaker.
I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. In today's debate, it would be easy to say that opposition is waging war on freedom of speech and trying to silence other people, but it's not even that. They are trying to silence people for the purpose of not bothering other citizens and keeping them in their little bubble, unaware of social and political issues. After all, not knowing is always best, right? So the exact wording of what opposition is doing is silencing some people and keeping others in the dark, all to keep a dysfunctioning society going and stopping change from happening. 3 areas of clash in today's debate. First, their argument that gravity nurtures violence and poverty. And second, how there are other ways that cost less to the government. And third, how it's an infringement on other people's liberty. But before I move on to the clashes, let's first look at the POI that was given to the first speaker by opposition. They accused us of supporting fascism and saying that what if fascist people want to express their opinion on graffitis, what will you do? Well, to respond to that POI, let's just say that people like these that are fascist are very likely to be very privileged. They're really not going to express their opinion on walls, right? So to begin with, that situation is highly unlikely. Not to say that they're not expressing their opinions in other ways, but rather in books, which exist in books and social media. So rather than waging war on graffitis, that are the only led way for underprivileged communities. No, thank you. What about you go do that with the publishing industry? So starting with the first area of clash, starting with their argument that graffiti nurtures violence and poverty. Doing graffiti just means they are violent, and it's an important factor in them staying poor. Sir, no, not mentioning. And then when we gave that POI about saying that Black people are violent and poor because they are doing graffitis, they said that they did not mention Black people not taken, that they did not mention Black people at all, while also talking about poor, underprivileged, overlooked people. Flash news in the US, the people more likely to be poor in the US are Black people. Sure, there are poor, underprivileged people that are not Black, but let's take this as the most apparent example. These people are poor because of the social constructs that are striving to keep them at the bottom of the barrel. And then they mentioned a very harmful stereotype that stems from the fact that Black people were historically the first people to make graffitis in New York. They said that making graffitis means they are more violent and it nurtures their violence. These, ladies and gentlemen, no, not taken, are the very stereotypes that make Black people the poorest community in the US, not graffiti. Get your facts straight. Second, they mentioned other ways that cost less for the government. So you care more about the government that has enough money to wage wars on countless countries but can't stand basic freedom of expression. They gave the example of Canvas at home. They said, you can make art, you can express your opinion at home. Ladies and gentlemen, that is the principle of shutting people down. You can express your opinions as long as you don't share it. No, thank you. Opposition is totally missing the point. They said that issues can be solved without graffiti. That's the thing. Some people are not privileged enough to have access to these ways. Graffiti is historically the way that underprivileged people have used to express their opinions, to fight for more change. For example, fighting for the civil rights movement in the Wall of Berlin. Yes.
For the panel, we have observed that the proposition team is quite obsessed with Black people, while we have never mentioned once in our debate or our speeches Black people. If this proves something, it's that they don't have enough substance to even hold the case, which is again a proof of their inability to defend their case. Now our case was clear and we will reaffirm that again.
Well, to respond to that POI, we are certainly talking about graffiti as a way for underprivileged people to express their opinions, and historically Black people have been the most people doing that. So I don't know why bringing Black people into the question is a bad thing or means that we do not know how to defend our case. But thirdly, they also mentioned infringement of other people's liberty. They're talking about the happiness of citizens. No, thank you. Well, that happiness cannot be achieved unless every single community is heard and understood. They began talking about private property and how a person with a private property that has done so much of that private property will not be very happy that that property has graffiti on it. Well, that means you have not listened to our model in the first speech. Currently, graffiti is illegal on public and private property. We're striving to making it legal in public property. And then they mentioned safety, but they did not show us any way that graffiti can cause violence or harm to citizens, except showing them the truth and showing them how people are actually feeling in this country of theirs. And then let's look at what our side has gave us. First, graffiti is a form of self-expression and art, and that is shown by the fact that ancient Romans and Greeks wrote their names and protest poems on buildings since ages ago. It is a means of communication to loudly proclaim this dissatisfaction with certain aspects of society, sort of political situation, or even certain decisions taken by world leaders. And it was used to protest Israel's decades-long control of territories in Palestine. And doing this draws more attention than simply spoken words. It is giving a voice to the voiceless. Some communities' only way of rebelling against authority when they're dissatisfied and have no other significant way to make dissatisfaction apparent. Graffiti has historically been a tool for political and social activity, particularly among people who have long been silenced or purposely left out of broader cultural discussions. This includes gay people, this includes Black people. Keith Haring used graffiti to make statements about AIDS, as we have showed you in the second speech, and the pandemic in the 1980s. This has done so much to make changes and to make people more aware of situation. And more recently, it has been used to make statements about gender inequality, all this through graffiti, all of these issues splattered in clear places for everybody to see, to burst the bubble of daily life for so many people. A disruption such as this is absolutely necessary to draw more attention. Yes.
How is it different from writing a tweet on Twitter that would reach much more people, millions of people, and a world that would be seen just by the citizens of that neighborhood?
Well, let me give you an example. A normal citizen going to work and then seeing all of this splattered across the walls, this is reaching more audience by making it clear that yes, you are doing this thing and yes, you are suffering. And this has been used even before Twitter, and this has had so much impact before Twitter, and it still has so much more impact. So it is used to express issues that have been ignored or simply forgotten. And street art is not the same thing. Street art is generally socially more acceptable for the very reason that it doesn't bother daily life as much. So it is beautiful painting. You look at it and be like, wow, not dig too deep and move on with your life. But graffiti in its very nature is supposed to shock people, and that's the beauty of it. It is an art in the way that it can draw so much attention, and attention even spoken words can never have. It was used as a form of political protests and dictatorships in Latin America in the 70s, when nobody had any way of speaking out. It is dictatorship, I remind you. It grew from the need not to be silenced anymore, to speak out. It creates more exposure, and plus it is a healthy let away for emotions for so many youth in Casablanca. Let's just mention that Moroccan parents are not the best at promoting artistic or any other form of expression. For some Moroccan kids, that's the only way they can make themselves heard. And making graffiti illegal is going against all the principle of freedom of expression. And for all these reasons, we are proud to propose.
Okay, thank you very much for that speech. The speaker spoke for 8 minutes and 25 seconds. So I think now we're at the final speech of this debate, which would be the third speech from the opposition side.
So I will start in 3, 2, 1. So what are the key mistakes of the proposition side? The proposition side say that graffitis are a form of art in public spaces and that it is a mean of self-expression. They also emphasize a lot on the word public spaces, and that is what we believe is the biggest problem with graffitis. Then they talk about graffiti being an art, and they say that graffiti do not affect people. However, if you are seeing political or harmful drawings 10 times a day, how would that not influence you? Imagine a kid who sees graffitis about terrorists next to his house every single day. Don't you think he is more likely to get influenced by it? Then they said something extremely contradicting, because at the beginning they say that people will not be influenced by graffitis. Then she said that they will be affected by their paintings. Then they say that graffiti is an art and that you have the right to express your feelings. They were just repeating over and over the same thing without explaining why graffitis would be a better way of expressing themselves. However, as the opposition side, we gave other ways to express your opinion. Like, you can express it in books, or you can express it on Twitter, or you can express it on Canvas. On social media, there are a lot and tons of ways of expressing your opinion without harming the others. However, judges, like as I said, books are private properties. You want to read about a subject, so you buy that book. However, with graffitis, people don't choose to see them. That is why we should not legalize them, because of our major stakeholders. They also say that we are silencing others to not harm some others. However, we believe that protecting the majority is way more important than only protecting the freedom of one person. Then they also talk about Black people, and I find it very funny since we didn't even say the word Black in our previous speeches. Their interpretations of our word is very wrong. And as the opposition side, we say that our model is that we will not legalize them in any public spaces. The major stakeholders of the debate are the inhabitants of those regions. We plan to protect the citizens that are daily influenced by these graffitis. Then we talk about how graffitis encourages crimes, and how the crimes doubled when graffitis were introduced to the world. As our first speaker said, in the US, when they stopped when they, as our first speaker said, in the US, when they start painting over graffitis and banning them, we saw a huge improvement in the young generation behavior. Yes, sure.
So what you're saying is that you're against graffitis being used to protest against oppression during the civil rights movement, right?
Could you please repeat that last part?
What I said is that by that you are saying that you are against protesting for oppression by graffitis during the civil rights movements, right?
We're not against protesting, but we're against protesting through graffitis, because you can protest in many other ways that will not harm other people. However, in graffitis, you are painting on a public. I'm still responding to one POI. So, however, in graffitis, you are painting in a public space. Let's imagine I have a house, I have like a wall, and then I found that someone wrote a discriminatory thing on my wall. How would I feel? It is not his right. He doesn't have the right to write or to draw on anything that is not his private property. However, in social media, they can write posts. In books, they can write whatever they want, or they can make protestations. There are so many ways to express their feelings, their expression, and everything, except graffitis that are harmful to the others. So, what about the other POI?
You're saying that on social media it will be less harmful than on graffitis, and there are other ways to express yourself than graffitis. But why not graffitis? And graffitis are an art like others.
So here you say that graffitis are an art. Yeah, we say that it is an art, but if an art is harming someone else, that doesn't make it like not a crime. A crime is something that harms other. So even if it's art, it can still be harmful. However, there are a lot of ways of art. Like if you have art on a canvas, it won't harm anyone. So we just don't make your art on public spaces. Make it on private places that will not harm the others. And also about the social media, when you are writing a post on the social media, I chose to go to that social media. I chose to download that app and go and look at your posts. However, on graffitis, I'm just walking and then I see them. Did I choose to see them? No. That is why graffitis, that is why in our side of the house, we oppose for legalization. I will I refuse now. I will continue my speech. So where was I? So then we also gave an example about how young kids that were raised in that were raised in places filled with graffitis. They were exposed to graffitis every day, and that made them, instead of developing the necessary skills, these poor kids went toward the crime world. This creates a social segregation, as the first speaker said. Then we say that art is not a crime, but it becomes anything, because a crime is when it harms other people. At the opposition side, we say that people can express their opinion, however, not in public spaces. That's logical. They can use canvas, books, social media, and so on. Judges, how can you create your own opinion when you are influenced on a daily basis by graffitis, which are other people's opinions? However, for other ways of expression, people are not forced to read or see them. They also failed, as the proposition side also failed to understand the panel to this motion, because they say that the government would allow a person to paint something discriminatory on the walls. That is why our side of the house, we believe that we should not legalize graffiti. Yes.
So you kept talking about how this would harm other people and you never showed us how the harm would actually ensue.
So the first and the second speaker, they talk about the harm, especially the first one. He talked about the crime rate that doubled when graffitis were created, when they started doing graffitis. So in the first and the second speech, they thoroughly explained what are the harms of these graffitis. And also in the second speech, she talked about the cost, which is a big harm to the government. Now, so why do we win this debate? To protect our major stakeholders, we must not legalize graffiti. As an example, the US, when they painted over the graffitis and banned them, we saw a huge improvement in the young generation's behavior. We win this debate because in our side of the house, because in our side of the house, we protect our major stakeholders. Also, the proposition side only talks about freedom of expression and so on, but this still didn't give a thorough explanation to why we should legalize them. They only say that since graffiti is an art and a way of expression, we should legalize it. In addition to that, the prop side didn't talk about the financial side of graffitis, unlike our sides of the house that talk about the cost of removing these graffitis. They also didn't talk about the psychological impacts of graffitis on other people. They talked so much about freedom of expression. Yes, you have freedom of expression, but your freedom stops when you're harming the others. As the second speaker said, how would a person from a minority feel when they see harmful messages on the walls? So we believe that we win this debate because the proposition side only talked about freedom of expression but forgot the other ways. However, in our cases, we gave plenty of arguments and we explained why our side of the house is better. The proposition side tried to make this debate of emotions and ideologies. We made this debate a collision of facts and arguments backed by strong evidence and logic. For these reasons, we are proud to oppose. Thank you very much.
Okay, the speaker spoke for 8 minutes and 41 seconds.